Hello everyone, Shinto Bean here discussing some more Warhammer combat cards, continuing the series looking at MadEmp's meta deck lists, and this time we'll be focusing on the Chaos faction. Assuming you've got 200 points to work with and all cards in the game unlocked at a pretty high level. So let's start with one of my personal favorite Chaos warlords, Skulltaker, who excels in melee combat. Whenever you leave an enemy card at 25 or less health, they'll get decapitated and killed instantly. So for this special rule, the Furious Charge and Death Blow traits combo particularly well, and we've got a whole bunch of both in this deck. So Karn the Betrayer recently got reworked. He now has a really strong Furious Charge and Death Blow for a secondary trait, so as is the 25-point Aspiring Champion, who also has Furious Charge and Death Blow. Then we've got 24 points Lucius the Eternal, who is also really good. Recently got a really big buff to his attack. He's got Furious Charge for secondary trait and Endless, so he can come back and reuse that Furious Charge. Then the one legendary in the deck is Lord Invocatus, who at the lower levels is not very good. I personally don't really have him at a high enough level to be of much use, so instead I'm using the much more expensive Bloodthirster, which is a really fun one to use. But yeah, Lord Invocatus, he's got Outflank and then Furious Charge for secondary trait, but at the higher levels he does have a pretty massive amount of damage output. Then for the cheaper cards, we've got 3 cheap cards with Death Blow, the Bloodletter, the Jackal, and then the Faceless Blade. Again, I'm not using the 10.1 because I just have it at a lower level and he doesn't really have very good stats, but the other 2 I do include with Skulltaker. And then finally, we've got the 15-point Warp Talon with Target Acquired in there. Which I don't use myself, but yeah, Skulltaker overall, he's quite fun to play as, but I haven't really been able to get him too far in ranked. Next up, we've got Ahriman, who is a legendary warlord, excelling in psychic damage. He is quite strong himself. He's got Psychic Link and Warp Surge for his dual traits, so if you deploy him alongside 2 other Psykers, he can deal some crazy damage when he comes into play. At least if you have him at a high enough level. His special rule isn't really that great, it just randomly either damages or heals a unit on the field, so not too reliable. We're running a bunch of Psykers in here, including an interesting one. So the 80-point unique Lord of Change, that is Kairos Fateweaver. Now most people will probably have just the regular Lord of Change at a much higher level, so that would be the go-to bodyguard, but Kairos does have a Psychic Scout, along with Psionic Blast, so he deals a massive amount of damage, as well as some burst damage when he deploys, so a pretty powerful card there at the higher levels. The one other legendary bodyguard is the 18-point Blue Scribes, which is a very cost-effective card. It's got shield for its primary trait, so at the high enough level it'll have 4 shields, just very tanky, very difficult to bring down. And it's got Outflank for its secondary trait. Then we've got the 29-point Infernal Master, who has Inspiring Presence for his main trait, so just a good support card. At level 9 he unlocks Psychic Link for a secondary trait. At the lower levels he doesn't really have very good damage output, but once he's got the Psychic Link, he'll be doing a lot more. And then the rest of the cards in here are kind of cheap fodder cards, which are kind of interesting. We don't have too many other Psykers in here. We've got, well, the 15-point Felgor Ravager Shaman is actually really useful because it has all 3 attack types and Medicay, so a very useful healer that's also a Psyker. We got the 5-point Psyker in there, the 15-point Rubric Marine, which is very tough. It doesn't have a psychic attack, but it still counts as a Psyker, so it'll combo with anything with Psychic Link, which is quite nice. The other 2, we've got the 3-point Demonette of Slaanesh with Taunt, just to add some additional protection. And then the 4-point Screamer. So a whole bunch of cards in here which you don't necessarily want to deploy like the weaker cards on the same turn. So yeah, lots of bodyguards. It might be hard to get the exact combo you want on the field, but definitely an interesting mix of units in this one. Moving on to Slaanesh, we've got the Mask, who has Fear and Inspiring Presence for the secondary trait. With the Mask, actually, yeah, a lot of the Slaanesh bodyguards combo really well with her. So we've got the 77-point Keeper of Secrets, which is possibly the best bodyguard in the game. Certainly one of the strongest ones for Chaos. It's just really tough and has all 3 attack types. Got Fear and Outflank for its traits. It's such a good card that, I mean, you could actually run it in pretty much any Chaos deck and it would do well. Especially when you're healing it. We've got Fabius Bile in there with the Medicae. And then the other legendary bodyguard is Celeste at 59 points, which has Inspiring Presence and Furious Charge, I believe. So you could just buff the stats of your guys. So basically you just got those 2 big damage dealers, the Keeper Secrets and Celeste. And because they have all 3 attack types, they would be able to attack first as long as you're able to keep them above 50% health. Potentially killing enemy units before they can attack, so that's the real power of this deck. But it does kind of require you to have those really strong cards at a high enough level, otherwise it's not going to be very impactful. So just a few other support units like the 2 weak bodyguards with Taunt and then the Screamer with Outflank. I've tried pretty much this exact deck before and it is pretty fun, but I haven't really pushed it to see how far I can get in ranked with it. And then we got Glogorox the Foul, who is one of the weakest warlords in the game, I think. He just doesn't really have that fun of a play style either, because it's a lot slower. Just slowly reduces the enemy's attack whenever they destroy your units. So you do want to include lots of guys with Endless. So we got like the 3-point Poxwalker, the 4-point Nurglings. Those both have Endless. We've got Lucius the Eternal, who does have a pretty strong attack, but also Endless. And then the 80-point, so this is a new card, Rodigus, who has Psionic Blast and Poison for his dual traits, which is a really fun combo. The thing is extremely powerful at the higher levels, but again, it just came out very recently, so almost no one's going to actually have it at a high level. But yeah, the thing has some crazy damage output, just able to constantly poison everything on the field. Which is definitely a fun card that I want to use at some point. We got Fabius Bile for some more healing, the Felgor Ravager with Medicae as well, and then the 4-point guy with Taunt, and then at 14 points, that is the Demagogue with Inspiring Presence and Shield for its secondary trait. So a solid support card that is pretty tough. It also has melee debuff, so yeah, I mean, if you want to get far in ranked mode, I can't recommend Glogorox the Foul. I think mainly the only reason that this deck would be fun to run is because of Rodigus. Without that, yeah, I don't really know. I mean, you could run the Lord of Change maybe, but not a Warlord I would like to main, for sure. Next up is Huron Blackheart, who, in contrast, has a much more interesting special rule, which buffs your units whenever you kill an enemy card. So it's basically the opposite of Glogorox. For this, you do want to keep your cards alive for as long as possible, especially, well, the ones that are dealing damage and killing things, which in this case will be the Lord of Change. I have used this sort of thing with Blackheart, and yeah, the Lord of Change with that big Psionic Blast is going to be killing things like constantly, so it's going to be getting most of the buffs. So you really need to keep that thing alive at all costs. So we have 2 healers in there again, Fabius Bile and the Felgor Shaman. And then we've got the 4-point Shambler with Taunt. We've got the Screamer again, which I'm surprised to see so often. I don't really use that card at all. I guess, I mean, having at least one outflank is useful. But yeah, there you go. I guess it does buff Psychic as well if you're going Psychic as your main attack type. And then the other interesting card in here is the 28-point Noise Marine, which has Barrage and Precision Shot for its secondary trait. So it's an interesting combination there. Psychic and ranged. I'm not really sure how that would work out. I think I prefer to just focus on maybe Psychic for myself. But again, because you're stealing the enemy attack stats, you could potentially build up an attack type of, either ranged or melee to switch to after going Psychic for a few turns. Yeah, the one big problem with Blackheart is if, like in this deck, if the Lord of Change dies, then you just lose so much momentum, and it's going to be hard to finish off the game, I think, especially because Blackheart himself, he's got Fear, so he's pretty solid, but he is only a rare card, so he only has 1 trait, which is kind of, weak for a Warlord. And finally, we've got Abaddon, who I'm running pretty much the exact same deck as this. Basically, what I like to do with Abaddon, though, is because I do have him at a very high level, I like to deploy him right on turn 1, so you can immediately start using his special rule, which only activates when he attacks. And so, yeah, if you don't deploy him on turn 1, it really sort of reduces the power of his special rule. Which is the problem with this deck, because it actually has 5 bodyguards. If you have 5 bodyguards, you cannot deploy the Warlord on the first turn. So I would only pick 4 bodyguards, which actually are the exact same ones that are in this deck. So the Keeper of Secrets, and then I would deploy the either the 18-point guy with Medicae, or the 28-point Venom Crawler with Taunt on the first turn. And then after those things die, you can deploy Fabius Bile, heal them all again. And yeah, this is a really fun deck, and actually one of my main Chaos decks, which I have taken pretty high into ranked mode. But again, you do have to have both Abaddon and the Keeper of Secrets at least at a very high level. So it's not really something that many players can run. So that's it for the Chaos faction. You'll notice that none of these decks have ranged builds at all. And while Chaos do have a couple powerful ranged cards, that's not really where they shine. They definitely are much better with melee and psychic builds, I think. So let me know what you think of these decks, and if you've found any other fun combo with Chaos, let me know in the comments. But that's it for this one. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.